The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer greatly from the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. Then Peter took Jesus aside and began to rebuke him. "God forbid, Lord, no such thing shall ever happen to you." Jesus turned to Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan. You are an obstacle to me. You are thinking not as God does, but as human beings do." Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Whoever wishes to come after me must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. What profit would there be for one to gain the whole world and forfeit his life? Or what can you give in exchange for your life? For the Son of Man will come with his angels in his Father's glory, and then he will repay all according to his conduct." The Gospel of the Lord. There once was a young novice in a monastery who went to his novice master and said, "Father, I want to find God. Show me how to find God." So the novice master led his young charge down to the lake that was on the monastery grounds, walked with him into the center of the lake, grabbed the novice by the head, pushed his head under water, and held him down. And the novice kicked and fought till finally he gave up and was almost drowned when the novice master pulled his head out from the water. Gasping for breath, he said, "Master, why did you do this to me?" The novice master said, "What did you want more than anything else while you were under the water?" And the novice said, "Why, air, of course, Master." And the novice master said, "When you want God as much as you wanted that air, you will find God." Today's first reading is taken from the prophet Jeremiah, a unique prophet in Israel's history, one of the great prophets of Israel's history. Straddled some very difficult times in history. The beginning of his ministry was in a relatively peaceful time in Israel, in the late 600s. He prophesied, calling people to justice and righteousness, and for a while his prophecy worked. There were great reforms made in Israel during the time of Jeremiah. But then things began to go bad. The people began to turn away from God again, and great disaster befell them. In 597 BC, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, came, waged war against the people of Israel, laid siege to Jerusalem, and conquered it. Took about half of the population into exile in Babylon, including the prophet Ezekiel. Prophet Ezekiel writes at the same time as Jeremiah, only Ezekiel is writing from the area of the Tigris and Euphrates in Babylon. Jeremiah is left in Jerusalem, and Jeremiah's mission in Jerusalem is to remind the people that just because the present danger was over, that they were to not lose faith, not go back to their bad behavior. And no matter what happened, he preached to them that they must be faithful, and if not, bad things were again going to happen. Now, the people who were left in Jerusalem at this point didn't like Jeremiah for that. They said, "Nebuchadnezzar is miles and miles away. We have nothing to worry about. Those poor other people got exiled. We're safe. We can do anything we want." And Jeremiah kept saying to them, "No, if you keep down your path, the same fate is going to happen to you." Several times Jeremiah was imprisoned, called a false prophet, Several of the false prophets in Jerusalem said, don't pay any attention to Jeremiah. Nothing's going to happen to us. Everything's going to be fine. 10 years after the original exile in 587, Nebuchadnezzar got tired of all of the problems in Jerusalem, returned to Jerusalem, sacked the city, destroyed and looted the Temple of Solomon. And Jeremiah was vindicated. Nebuchadnezzar released Jeremiah from prison, told his friends to take good care of him. He warned you, and you did not listen. Jeremiah was told he could go anywhere he wanted to for safety. So some of his friends got together and took him to Egypt. And it is there that he disappears into the midst of history. One legend says he went to Egypt, continued to prophesy there, and died of old age in Egypt. Another more prominent legend says that his so-called friends actually murdered him on the way to Egypt. But Jeremiah is unique in a very special way because of a certain series of passages that are in his book. One scholar has said that maybe Jeremiah kept what we would call today a prayer journal, a writing of his most intimate talks and conversations with God. And that after he died, when a scribe was writing down the words of Jeremiah for the book of Jeremiah, that he found Jeremiah's journal and included some of those prayers, what have come to be known as the Confessions of Jeremiah, within his book. What we hear today is one of them. These Confessions of Jeremiah are cries for help to God. It is the impassioned cry of a man torn within himself. A man who says, I don't want to do this anymore. People hate me. They beat me. They throw me into prison. He begs God, God, if you won't help me, at least punish my enemies and let me see that punishment. And God says, no, you prophesy, I'll take care of everything else. Today's message from Jeremiah, this is one of the most heartfelt of all of the confessions. It's very unorthodox language. It's very violent language. You duped me, Lord, and I allowed myself to be duped. You were too strong for me, and you triumphed. That's actually a rather watered-down version of what is in Hebrew. The word in Hebrew that he uses for duped actually talks about seduction. You tricked me. You seduced me. You bamboozled me. Where it says, you were too strong for me. In Hebrew, it says, overpowered me. It is the same word they use for rape and assault. That's how violated Jeremiah felt by his call to be a prophet. I don't want to do this anymore, he says. Whenever I speak, I have to speak bad things. People hate me. They laugh at me. They throw things at me. I don't want to do this anymore. But then he says, the word of the Lord burns so deeply in my heart, I cannot stop. It fills my entire body. It is in my bones. It is in my spirit. It is in everything I have. And no matter what I do, I cannot run from the word of God. It possesses me. I must be what God has called me to be. Today, I think Jeremiah is asking us, in this very unorthodox way, what is it that burns in our heart? What is it that possesses us so much that we are willing to even take upon all sorts of bad things and mistreatment in order to fulfill that? What is it that calls us to be the persons we are to be? That thing that's within us that we can't live without? And the other question is that God? We talk about our passions for things in life. Certainly, my time here in Michigan has showed me that there are some people who are passionate about Michigan State football. And there are some people who are even equally passionate about Michigan football. And others who are passionate about Notre Dame football. And the Detroit Lions and the Detroit Tigers. And of course, the New York Giants and the New York Yankees, but there are few of us who are passionate about them here in Michigan than there are about the others. And I know people who will do all sorts of things to go to Spartan games and the Wolverine games and the Lions games and to Tigers games. But would they do the same thing for God? What is it that fires them about football, baseball, hockey, about any of those kind of things in our lives that we don't give to God? We need that inspiration. We need people who are willing to give everything they have to do God's work. And I'm not just talking about priests and religious. A lot of times when you hear us talk about giving up everything you have to do God's work, you know it's going to come into a vocation spiel about becoming a priest or religious. And that's true. We do need people who are willing to give their lives in commitment to being priests and religious. But every single one of us in this room is called to do God's work. It's called to be God's prophets and preachers. Every one of us is called to have that fire in our hearts and in our bones that Jeremiah had. Each, of course, in our own way. Some of us here from the pulpit, some in a classroom, some in an operating room, some in a garden, some driving the streets, some, you name an occupation, you name a career, you name a vocation, and God's fire is in there. The fire for family, the fire of love that brings us to care for other people. Now, are we going to do it perfectly? No. Are we going to complain mightily? Yes. And we have a beautiful example in the Confessions of Jeremiah. Someone who complains mightily to God. But yet, bottom line is, yes, Lord, I have come to do your will. Jesus, in the Garden of Gethsemane, in several different ways, he says, I don't really want to do this. But not my will, but your will be done. Jesus says in today's gospel, in order to follow me, you must take up your cross. None of us want to take up a cross. Taking up a cross is not easy. We don't have little motorized crosses with little paddings on the shoulder that help us wheel our way through life. Carrying the cross is a burden. Carrying the cross requires strength. Carrying the cross brings with it suffering. But it brings with us the power and the grace of God. We are called to do mighty things, regardless of what happens, regardless of how well we do. Because sometimes we're going to get ourselves, all set and ready to go do something, and we're going to go out there and we're going to do it, and we're going to find out, oops, I shouldn't quite sort of done it that way. And that happens. We're fallible. We're human beings. And on those days, we ask the Lord for forgiveness. But that should not stop us, should not put out that fire in our hearts simply because once in a while we make a mistake, because we do. If we waited to the point where we would never again make a mistake in what we did, we would do nothing. And if we did nothing, nothing would ever get done. In 1899, Teddy Roosevelt was in Chicago, and he gave a speech at the Hamilton Club. And it is a wonderful speech, and I want to give you just a little, to end this, I want to give you just a little piece of that, because I think he says a lot of what I've been saying here. And I think Teddy Roosevelt says it a little bit better, but I don't know. He says, in the battle of life, it is not the critic who counts, nor the one who points out how the strong person stumbled, or where the doer of a deed could have done better. The credit belongs to the person who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs and comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, who does actually strive to do deeds, who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotion, spends oneself in a worthy cause, and who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at worst, if he or she fails, at least fails while daring greatly. Far better it is to dare mighty things, to win glorious triumphs even though checkered by failure, than to rank with those timid spirits who neither enjoy nor suffer much because they live in the gray twilight that knows neither victory nor defeat.